One of my favorite consoles of all time is the 3DS. I still remember how badly I wanted one of these when I was younger. I remember seeing the commercial that announced the price drop and running up and telling my mom the crazy news. I remember begging for months on end until one day I found one right under the Christmas tree. I was so excited and I unboxed it immediately. I didn't have any cash saved up for games, but that didn't stop me from enjoying my new console. The 3DS came with a variety of apps to keep you occupied, even if you didn't have any games, something that we don't see nowadays on new consoles. You had your meme maker, which I spent so much time making memes of my friends, relatives, and even cartoon characters. And look, I know I'm not the only one that made Peter Griffin. You also had your Street Pass Me Plaza, which at release had a simple RPG game and puzzle swap, a simple game where you exchanged puzzle pieces with people that you street passed. And once you completed that puzzle, you unlocked the 3D visualizer of that game. I remember being so mesmerized by these, although completing them was not as easy as you would think. The 3DS came packed in with AR cards, which was such an underused feature of the 3DS. These cards were used in an app called AR Games, which would open up the 3DS camera and use the cards to create some augmented reality games. The games were simple, but they were still so much fun. I remember putting so much time into the fishing one and trying to catch everything. And lastly, we had Face Raiders, essentially a tech demo, but it was a good way to show all the capabilities within the 3DS. And despite all of these games being simple in nature, they were still really fun, especially for being packed in titles. But I'm not telling you to buy a 3DS for the built-in apps, so let's talk about the games, because in my opinion, the 3DS has to have one of the strongest game libraries of any system. And I'm going to talk about a few games from each category, so let's start with some platformers. The 3DS gave us some of the best platformers, one of which is Super Mario 3D Land, which deserves its own video by the way. Let me know if you guys would like to see that. It took the world design aspect of Mario Galaxy and Super Mario 64 and combined it with a faster paced new Super Mario Bros. Gameplay. This game was so good, and I even 100%ed it a few times. The game also had a really good post game. Once you beat the game, you unlock these really hard stages with Purple Mario, which follows you, and once he touches you, it's game over. These levels were so much harder due to this and made the game so much more replayable. The 3DS also received a sequel to New Super Mario Bros., which wasn't revolutionary but was still a fun game nevertheless. You also had 2 Kirby games, 2 Yoshi games, Donkey Kong, Sonic, and many others. The 3DS was just stacked with really good platformers. The 3DS also received games that you wouldn't expect on this console. I'm talking about home console experiences but on the 3DS. And the first game that comes to mind is Resident Evil Revelations, which debuted on the 3DS before eventually being moved over to other consoles. This game was my introduction to the Resident Evil series, and this is such a good game. The game visuals look stunning, and it is one of the best showcases of the 3D functionality. This game wasn't just a side game with no story. Revelations was a full-fledged Resident Evil game brought over to the handheld, and it's one of the best games on the system in my opinion. But that's not it. The 3DS had many games that felt like they should have been on a home console but instead were on the 3DS. 2 of those being Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, which blew my mind growing up, and then Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, which I put so many hours into as well. If action and adventure is more your style, the 3DS also has you covered. The system received both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask remakes, which in my opinion, this is the definitive way to experience these games. They took the N64 games and gave them a complete visual overhaul and even brought over new features like the gyro aiming. We also got A Link Between Worlds, which is one of the best Zelda games of all time in my opinion, letting you complete dungeons in whatever order you choose. The 3DS also saw the return of 2D Metroid, which if you look at my channel, you will see just how much of a Metroid fanboy I am. Samus Returns was an amazing remake of a Metroid game that really needed it, and it is a must play on 3DS. We also got a Luigi's Mansion sequel, and the original GameCube game was also brought over. Another slept on title is Kid Icarus Uprising. The controls are a little bit wonky, but this is such a fun game. The game has a really good story, fun gameplay, and memorable bosses that make this a must play on any 3DS. This game even had online functionality. There was a free-for-all mode, a team battle mode, and these were so much fun. Unfortunately, Nintendo did shut down the servers, so you can't play these anymore unless you have a modded system. Now I know you have all been waiting for this, but RPGs were very dominant on the 3DS. We got 2 generations of Pokemon games, which in my opinion, this is when we got the last really good games in the series. Generation 6 was so good, especially the Sapphire and Ruby remakes. These games had a great story, so much post-game content, and so many new additions. I literally have over 600 hours of playtime in these games, so trust me, I know. The 3DS also received 4 Mario and Luigi games, which were all really good in my opinion. You had Dream Team, Paper Jam, and 2 remakes, Superstar Saga and Bowser's Inside Story. Which that one didn't really make sense. The original game was a DS title and was already playable on the 3DS. This game also released very late into the 3DS life, so sales were very low, making this a very expensive title nowadays. The 3DS library is just super strong. Some other games I haven't mentioned are Animal Crossing, Tomodachi Life, Mario Kart 7, the Fire Emblem series. These are just some games that you can expect to play on this console. So far, all of the games I've mentioned have been first-party releases, but the Nintendo 3DS also had a little something called the Nintendo eShop. Here is where you could download a ton of indie games. One of my personal favorites was Pushmo, a puzzle-solving game that also utilized the 3D features so well. Another absolute banger was Gunman Clive. This game had such a unique art style, catchy songs, and the difficulty was hard. This was one of my favorite games on the system, especially since it was only $2, and as a broke high school kid, I couldn't have asked for more. If for some reason there are no 3DS games that caught your eye, the system was also fully backwards compatible, meaning that you could play every Nintendo DS game on it, expanding the already phenomenal library even more. One of the coolest features about the 3DS is how customizable it was. I still remember the day the themes update dropped and being so excited about making my background go from white to blue. I know, nothing crazy, but then Nintendo started to do their own themes, and this is when things got good. Whatever your favorite franchise was, there was most likely a theme for it. Sad part was that these themes weren't free, and me being the broke high school kid that I was, I didn't get a chance to experiment that much with themes. Well, that is until I use Homebrew apps, but I'll talk about those later. Later on in the 3DS life, Nintendo also introduced an app called Nintendo Badge Arcade, and wow was this app cool. This app allowed you to get pins that you could then place in your home screen to further decorate it. Of course, this had some pay-to-play elements, but Nintendo was generous enough to give you 2 free tries every day, and I remember eagerly waiting to get my attempts in. Just these 2 simple things made the 3DS so customizable. Everyone's home screen looked unique and interesting, and it's a charm that isn't really present in newer consoles nowadays. I really expected themes to eventually make their way to the Switch, but they never did. All we got was the 2 bland black and white background, while the 3DS received so much love and personality. Now, if you really want to kick things up a notch, you could always install custom firmware on your 3DS to unlock so much more. CFW opens up so many possibilities. One of these is custom themes. I even remember going to the library and using their computers to make a theme online and then putting it on my 3DS. It was so cool because I was the only person in the world with that theme. On top of that, you could also install themes that were made by other people, which the quality on some of these was phenomenal. Like I said, I'm a huge Metroid fan and I didn't see it getting much love in the themes department, so this is a theme that I created and I'm super proud of it. Custom ports of games were also a thing. One of the most surprising ones for me is Five Nights at Freddy's, which runs surprisingly really good on the 3DS. You could actually play the first 4 games on your 3DS. Another thing that you can do is install fan games and mods, one of them being this Mario Kart 7 mod that introduces more tracks and characters. It even has a working online mode. Pokemon mods were also a thing here. You can install mods that give you a different experience if you want to switch things up. You can also get so many emulators, apps to read manga, videos, and so much more. Literally, whatever you want to do on your 3DS, you probably can do it. I personally use my 3DS for anything retro, especially Game Boy games. The Game Boy Advance is another one of my favorite consoles that I'm very fond of, but it's very hard to break into its library if you didn't grow up with it and kept your stuff. And even if you did keep your stuff, it's still not the most comfortable way to play. The original GBA didn't have a backlit screen and ran on batteries. The system was also quite small. The Game Boy Advance SP had 2 versions, a front lit and a backlit option. Obviously the backlit option is the way to go, but you still had to play your games on an uncomfortable platform. So if you ask me what's the best way to experience Game Boy Advance games, then I'm gonna say it's the 3DS. You see, the 3DS doesn't emulate GBA games. When you run them through the Virtual Console app, it actually uses the DS hardware to run the games on the hardware, giving you a much smoother experience. Okay, so now you want a 3DS, but which one should you get? The 3DS received plenty of models, some of which are better than the others. To keep things simple, I'm going to separate the consoles into 2 categories, the old and the new. The old 3DS lineup includes the original 3DS, the 3DS XL, and the 2DS. My first 3DS was the original one, and in my opinion, this is the worst option you can get. For starters, this thing is a fingerprint magnet, and on top of that, the home, start, and select buttons aren't physical buttons that protrude from the system, but rather this sleek bar below the touchscreen. And don't get me wrong, this looks futuristic and cool, but these things are so prone to breaking and denting. Same thing goes for the L and R buttons. For some reason, these buttons tend to fail. I tend to take really good care of my systems, and from just regular use, both my L and R buttons as well as my home button started to fail on me. The 3DS XL fixed all of these issues. The home, start, and select buttons were all physical buttons now, and the L and R buttons were touched up to make them not fail. The system was also bigger and used a matte plastic to eliminate the fingerprint problem. The 2DS, however, was a bare bones version of the system that removed the hinge, and as the name suggests, it also removed the 3D functionality. However, this system was surprisingly really comfortable to hold. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the revision. The new 3DS, new 3DS XL, and new 2DS XL. These systems took the previous improvements and added even more. The system came with an eye tracker that made using the 3D feature so much more comfortable. Before, you had to hold your 3DS perfectly straight and at the perfect distance, but now with the eye tracker, it made it so that you didn't have to be so tight when playing using the 3D feature. And it actually worked really well. It also introduced the C-Stick, which essentially made the Circle Pad Pro attachment a built-in feature. The system also came with upgraded internals that made it much more powerful. And lastly, some of these consoles came with better screens. Every original system came with a TN display, which made it so that colors looked more washed when looking at the screen from certain angles. Some new 3DSs, however, came with IPS displays that made colors look much more vibrant and eliminated the color washing away when looking at it from certain angles. You could get lucky and find a system that came with both screens having an IPS display, but there were instances of some consoles that had just the upper display being IPS, and if you were really unlucky, you could get both screens being TN. If you want to check what kind of screens you have, there is a Homebrew app that checks for you, or you can do this trick to see for yourself. Simply hold your DS at an angle, and if the colors start to wash away, then boom, it's a TN display. IPS displays are only included in the new 3DS, so if you pick up the new 2DS XL, it will come with TN screens. This system was also prone to fail from the hinge, making it more prone to breaking. The new 3DS, however, was super cool because it introduced another level of customization. You had faceplates. These were so cool. If you ever got bored of the look of your 3DS, you could simply change out the plates. And there were a lot of really cool ones to pick from. My personal favorites were the ones that were bundled in with the Pokemon Anniversary system. Okay, so now we've covered all of the systems. Which one should you get? In my opinion, the best two options are the new 3DS and the new 3DS XL. Not only do these systems have the chance of coming with the better IPS display, but the additional power really helps when using your 3DS for Homebrew and emulation. Which one you pick from these, however, is completely up to you. If you want the bigger screens, go for the 3DS XL, and if you want a more portable system, go for the regular size. Now, if you didn't care for the extra power or the 3D functionality, I'd personally go with the original 2DS. This system is super comfortable and can be a great way to see what the 3DS library has to offer. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this yap session about one of my favorite consoles. I'd love to hear from you guys. What is your favorite 3DS game? Please let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys soon.